Life of Brian, the movie that ignited the most terrifying firestorm in cinematic history. It wasn't just a comedy. To millions, it was heresy, an ultimate blasphemy that slapped the most sacred religious values right in the face. But behind the cheap fake beards, the sand-filled sandals, and the gut-busting laughs, the on-set chaos of the Monty Python comedy troupe was just as ridiculous as their script. What if I told you that this project was almost thrown into the trash if it weren't for a legendary member of the Beatles personally mortgaging his house to fund the entire thing? That the lead actor had to desperately flee the British tax police, deliver a god-tier performance, and then double as the on-set doctor for the entire crew in the middle of the scorching desert? And funniest of all, numerous towns passed laws banning the film from being screened, despite the fact that their towns didn't even have a single movie theater. Today, let's travel back in time to the dusty land of Judea to peel back the 20 most bizarre, dark, and wild facts about Life of Brian. This isn't blasphemy. This is the greatest comedy masterpiece of all time. Number 1. The global wave of outrage and the fear of faith. No one is to stone anyone until I blow this whistle, even if they do say the name Jehovah. The highly satirical stoning scene in the film inadvertently became a perfect prophecy for its own fate in real life. The outrage against Life of Brian didn't wait until the movie hit theaters to explode. It started right from the test screenings. Whispers turned into protests, quickly fanning into an international firestorm. In the United States, thousands of believers gathered outside movie theaters in New York, holding up signs that read, "This film is a crime against God." An unprecedented phenomenon in religious history occurred. The release of this film caused leaders from traditionally opposing religions, Catholic priests, Jewish rabbis, and Protestant ministers, to join hands and stand shoulder to shoulder in a unified alliance just to demand its removal from theaters. Numerous televised debates were launched, notably the heated confrontation between two Python members and the Bishop of Southwark alongside conservative journalist Malcolm Muggeridge. And the most ironic and hilarious part of this entire boycott? The vast majority of those who screamed the loudest were the most fiercely outraged and grabbed microphones to condemn the film. Admitted they hadn't even bothered to watch a single second of it. They just heard through the grapevine that it mocked God and went completely insane following a herd mentality. The Pythons had accidentally proven their film's core satirical thesis. The mob is always blind and easily led by baseless rumors. Number 2. The most comedic bans in British history. If the religious riots in America were intensely hostile, the reactions in the UK and certain European countries were dripping with absurd comedy. Many countries took drastic measures. Ireland, a deeply Catholic nation, instantly banned the film across its entire territory for 8 long years. Norway slapped it with a red warning label and banned it for a year, claiming it violated anti-blasphemy laws. Over in the UK, the National Censorship Board, the BBFC, actually cleared the film for theaters with an AA rating for ages 14 and up. However, British law allowed local city councils to make their own final decisions on whether a film could be shown in their jurisdiction. And so, the absurdity reached its absolute peak. Local politicians, terrified of losing votes from their devout constituents, raced to issue bans on Life of Brian. A total of 39 local authorities in the UK banned the film or slapped it with an X rating, 18+ only. But the funniest part is, at least 11 of those city councils solemnly passed legislation to ban the film, despite the brutal reality that their towns didn't even have a movie theater. But all those censorship efforts backfired miserably. The more bans that were issued, the more massive the crowds at the box office became, turning it into a bona fide blockbuster. Number 3. Freeloading on an epic set and the locals' confusion. To recreate ancient Judea in the 1st century, you need a colossal budget to build temples, houses, and city walls. But the Monty Python crew, operating on money borrowed from George Harrison, had to pinch every penny. Their solution? Go freeloading on someone else's leftovers. Just 2 years prior, in 1977, acclaimed director Franco Zeffirelli had traveled to the city of Monastir in Tunisia to to shoot the magnificent religious epic Jesus of Nazareth. To serve that solemn project, a massive, highly detailed, and incredibly grand set of Jerusalem was erected right in the middle of the desert. When Zeffirelli left, the set remained completely intact. Seizing this golden opportunity, director Terry Jones immediately flew the entire Life of Brian crew straight to Tunisia and rented that exact same set for dirt cheap. The contrast is utterly, brutally ironic. The same arches, stone temples, and dusty courtyards, where just 2 years earlier solemn miracles and sacred sermons about Christ had taken place, were now echoing with mocking laughter, ridiculous slapstick, and upbeat songs about crucifixion. And it didn't stop there. The Pythons also inherited the local Tunisian extras. The very same locals who had been hired by Zeffirelli to play humble, devout disciples weeping before the Savior were now hired to stand around watching the Monty Python crew run amok in fake beards while shouting meaningless Latin phrases. One local, far too accustomed to the solemn religious filmmaking style from before, scratched his head in confusion and muttered to a translator, "None of this crazy stuff happened last time." Number 4. The cheap rubber band and the very Python-esque solution. There is an incredibly hilarious scene in the film where Brian, thinking he's just opening his window to greet the sunrise, accidentally exposes himself entirely naked to thousands of fanatic followers gathered below. The crowd gasps in awe at the sight of him. But as they prepared to shoot this scene, the crew faced a sensitive historical and anatomical problem. The plot dictates that Brian is a first-century Jewish man, which means he absolutely had to be circumcised according to religious custom. However, actor Graham Chapman was British and he was uncircumcised. If they shot it as is, it would be a massive historical plot hole, and the religious critics who already despised the film would have another excuse to nitpick their sloppiness. So, how does a low-budget film crew solve this mess? Blurring effects? Expensive silicone prosthetics? Hiring a makeup specialist? Absolutely not. With extreme comedic pragmatism, Graham Chapman simply grabbed an incredibly cheap rubber band, pulled the excess skin back, tied it neatly out of the camera's line of sight, and proudly stepped out the window to shoot. A crude, bizarre, and probably quite painful solution, but it achieved 100% visual effectiveness. That is the exact spirit of homegrown problem-solving that perfectly defines the chaotic and wacky Monty Python style. Number 5. The Savior named the Beatles. Every cinematic project needs money, but rarely is a film so ruthlessly unplugged by its investors right on the eve of shooting quite like Life of Brian. The massive studio EMI Films had originally agreed to fund it. But just a mere 2 days before the entire crew was set to board a plane to Tunisia to start filming, Lord Bernard Delfont, the powerful chairman of EMI, finally sat down and read the script. When he realized the film was a biting satire on religious sects and fanaticism, he was absolutely terrified. Fearing a global boycott from religious powers, Delfont immediately suspended the project and locked the vault. The Monty Python crew plunged into absolute despair. The shooting schedule was locked, props were built, the cast was ready, but they didn't have a single penny to their name. And then, out of nowhere, a miracle appeared in the form of a rock star. George Harrison, the legendary guitarist of the Beatles. Harrison was a die-hard Monty Python fan. When he heard the project was killed, he didn't hesitate to do the craziest thing a celebrity could possibly do. He took his massive mega mansion at Friar Park, along with his London office building, and mortgaged them at the bank, securing a massive emergency loan of around £3 million. He single-handedly founded a brand new production company named Handmade Films for one sole purpose: to bring Life of Brian to the big screen. When the Pythons asked why he would risk his entire fortune on a blasphemous comedy, Harrison simply shrugged and replied deadpan, "Because I wanted to see it." Eric Idle later called that move the most expensive movie ticket ever bought in the history of mankind. As a tribute to their savior, the Pythons snuck George Harrison in for a cameo. If you look closely at the scene where the crowd is frantically pushing, screaming, and shoving, you'll see Harrison right there. He's wearing a red headscarf, quietly trying to squeeze his way across the screen. Number 6. The Epic. born from a drunken joke. Great cinematic works usually stem from divine inspiration or scripts incubated for decades. Life of Brian did not. It was born from a ridiculous joke told during a drunken stupor. In 1975, after the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail achieved resounding success, the comedy troupe was hounded by the press everywhere they went. Everywhere they went, reporters asked the same boring question: "What is your next project?" During a party in Amsterdam, after having downed quite a bit of alcohol and feeling exhausted by the repetitive interviews, Eric Idle mumbled a provocative, completely fake title: "Jesus Christ, Lust for Glory." That answer left the reporters stunned, but it made the Python members burst into hysterical laughter. However, once the hangover wore off, they paused and looked at each other. Wait, what if we actually did that? Initially, the idea was to create a massive, bloody, epic war movie starring Jesus Christ, wielding a sword and slaughtering people. But when they actually started researching the Bible, they quickly realized a truth: Jesus Christ wasn't funny. His teachings on love and forgiveness were deeply sincere and respectable. What was truly funny, what actually deserved to be mocked, was everything else around him. It was the fanaticism of the mob, the political factions constantly tearing each other apart, and the conservative bureaucracy. So they scrapped the idea of making a movie about Jesus. Instead, Life of Brian was born, telling the story of Brian, a wildly unlucky Jewish guy, born on the exact same day, in the stable right next door to Jesus, who spends his entire life being mistaken for the Messiah. Through a stroke of genius pivot, they created a movie not about Christ, but about the chaos and absurdity of the people who misinterpreted his words. Number 7. Racing the Police and the Outer Space Rescue. In a movie set in biblical times, Brian falling from a high tower and suddenly being caught by an alien UFO is one of the most absurd, insane, and out-of-place scenes in history. But the behind-the-scenes story of this shot is even more thrilling than an action movie. The entirety of Life of Brian was shot in the Tunisian desert, except for the crashing spaceship scene. This VFX-heavy shot had to be filmed on an indoor soundstage in London, UK. A massive problem arose. The lead actor, Graham Chapman, was a tax exile at the time. In the late 70s, the UK imposed an absurdly high income tax rate of over 80% on high earners. To protect his wealth, Chapman had fled to live in Los Angeles. Under British law, if he returned and stayed on UK soil for more than 24 hours, the tax authorities would immediately freeze his assets and slap a colossal tax bill on his entire global income. And so, a breathless filming operation unfolded. Graham Chapman secretly caught a flight and touched down in London. He was dragged by a team of assistants straight from the airport to the set. With no time to rest, he instantly changed clothes, climbed into the plywood spaceship cockpit set, screamed his panicked lines, and nailed his facial close-ups. The very second the director yelled, "Cut!" Chapman wiped his sweat, sprinted to a waiting getaway car with the engine already running, and sped straight to Heathrow Airport, escaping the UK just before the 24-hour clock struck zero. Number 8. The Out-of-Place Flying Saucer. Let's be honest. A satirical movie set in biblical first-century times suddenly shoving a sky-high laser-shooting spaceship chase right into the middle of its runtime is absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't serve the plot, it doesn't contribute to the message, and it's completely pointless. So why is it there? In 1979, the world was going absolutely crazy for Star Wars. Terry Gilliam, a visual artist itching to prove himself, felt an overwhelming urge to flex his skills. He desperately wanted a special effects sequence to show off his miniature modeling and lighting effects capabilities. So, he used every argument in the book to convince the rest of the troupe to let him shove a sci-fi UFO chase scene into the script. His justification was, Brian is falling from a great height and needs a Deus Ex Machina event to survive. Using stop-motion animation and plastic models, Gilliam personally directed that entirely random outer space chase sequence. It completely derails the plot for a solid minute and a half. But with Monty Python's signature unparalleled style, that extreme out-of-placeness automatically morphed into a hilarious, absurd gag, breaking every rule of filmmaking and becoming one of the most unforgettable, bizarre moments of the entire film. Number 9. The Brotherhood that almost shattered. 4 years earlier, during the Monty Python and the Holy Grail project, the director's chair was split evenly between Terry Jones and Terry Gilliam. That created an absolute disaster behind the scenes. The two men had massive egos and completely opposing visions. Gilliam was a perfectionist visual artist obsessed with lighting, artistic camera angles, and fog. Meanwhile, Jones was an actor's director who only cared about whether the comedic timing of the jokes was landing perfectly. As a result, they bickered constantly on set. Scenes were often sneaked into the editing room by one Terry to be recut behind the other Terry's back, tearing the group's solidarity to shreds. Having learned a deep, painful lesson from that toxicity, before Life of Brian began, the 6 Python members sat down and issued an ultimatum. There had to be a pact. There could only be one captain on set. Ultimately, sole directorial power was handed to Terry Jones. His responsibility was to shape the tone, work with the actors, and keep the comedy flowing smoothly. In compensation, Terry Gilliam was given total control over production design. Gilliam poured all his obsessive detailing into building an ancient, filthy, dusty, and fly-ridden Judean world to serve as the backdrop for the story. Number 10. The lost cameo and the homage to a legend. When the movie hit theaters, many eagle-eyed viewers were startled to see Spike Milligan appear in an incredibly brief role. He played one of the crazy, senile prophets preaching absolute nonsense on the street. But the truth is, Milligan wasn't on the cast list. He didn't sign a contract, and his appearance was purely a bizarre twist of fate. Spike Milligan was an absolute god in the British comedy scene. At the time the movie was filming in Tunisia, Milligan just happened to be vacationing there to visit old Wubwatu battlefield ruins. When the Python members heard their idol was wandering around near their hotel, they didn't miss their chance. They ran out into the street, grabbed him, and begged him to visit the set. The moment Milligan stepped onto the set, director Terry Jones immediately shoved a costume that looked like torn rags into his hands and tossed him right into the middle of the scene. No rehearsals, no written script. Milligan simply got on camera, flailed his arms and legs around, screamed pure gibberish with the caliber of a comedic genius, and then left to continue his vacation. That fleeting flash of brilliance was like a magical collision between the two greatest generations of British comedy, immortalized forever on screen. Number 11. Transforming into a doctor in the middle of the desert. This is perhaps the most inspiring and touching behind-the-scenes story of the film. Graham Chapman was a talented actor, but he was also the most rebellious and unstable member of the group. By the late 70s, his alcoholism had spiraled completely out of control. He frequently missed his cues, slurred his words, stumbled around, and there were times he couldn't remember a single line of dialogue. But when he realized the immense weight of playing the reluctant messiah in Life of Brian, Chapman made a life-or-death decision. Get sober. He cut off alcohol completely right before the cameras rolled. Going cold turkey brought on terrifying tremors and excruciating withdrawals, but he gritted his teeth and pushed through it all. And then, the payoff arrived in the middle of the scorching Tunisian desert. Under 104 degrees, 40 degrees heat, the crew started dropping like flies. Extras fainted, and dysentery alongside severe stomach bugs spread like wildfire across the set. Few people know that before becoming a comedian, Graham Chapman had graduated from medical school and was a fully licensed doctor. During that medical crisis, the man who had just conquered his own demons stepped up to be the anchor for everyone else. He took pulses, prescribed medication, treated digestive illnesses, and silently kept hundreds of people from collapsing on the burning sand. Number 12. The respect hidden behind the laughter. Looking from the outside, Life of Brian looks like a direct, frontal assault on Christianity. But inside the writer's room, the Python's ultimate golden rule was the exact opposite. Never touch Jesus. This didn't stem from a fear of being boycotted, but from deep intellectual respect. Before writing the script, they seriously reread the New Testament and realized a cinematic truth. Jesus Christ simply wasn't funny. His sermons about forgiveness, love, and peace were far too sincere and perfect to be mocked. Any attempt to smear Christ himself would just turn the movie into a cheap, offensive gag. So, they drew a line of pure genius. Life of Brian absolutely does not mock God. Instead, the film turns its satirical spear toward everything around him. The herd mentality of the mob begging for miracles, the fanatics willing to slaughter each other over a lost sandal, and the blindness of dogmatic organizations. That choice sharpened the blade of the work. They weren't targeting sacred faith. They were targeting human absurdity when that faith is abused. Number 13. It's not blasphemy. It's heresy. Precisely because they had carefully drawn that aforementioned line, the Pythons were incredibly furious and frustrated by the accusations from religious figures. Director Terry Jones once irritably declared in an interview, "This film is like the history of the church condensed into 3 minutes." They found it absolutely ridiculous that thousands of people were standing outside theaters screaming for a ban, when the plot of the film was actually defending the original values of religion from fanaticism. The Python troupe fired back at the angry mobs with a razor-sharp philosophical statement that was strong enough to crush any accusation. It's not blasphemy aimed at insulting the divine, it's heresy, a critique of the church's narrative. Unfortunately, in 1979, the protesting mobs didn't have the patience to distinguish between those two academic concepts. Number 14. The art of marketing. Built from a ban. When your movie is banned, condemned, and boycotted, a normal studio would panic and issue a public apology. But if you are Monty Python, you pick up those prohibition papers and turn them into the greatest marketing campaign ever. When Life of Brian was completely banned in Norway over accusations of violating religious laws, distributors in neighboring Sweden seized the golden opportunity. Instead of hiding the sensitive truth, they launched an advertising campaign plastered all over the streets of Stockholm with an unprecedented slogan. So funny, it was banned in Norway. That tagline didn't just deliver a mocking blow to their neighbors' conservative censorship system. It struck right at the core of human curiosity, the forbidden fruit psychology. Swedish audiences flocked to the theaters not in spite of the ban, but precisely because of it. Number 15. The immortal anthem that was almost trashed. No one could ever forget the ending of Life of Brian. Dozens of people being crucified on crosses, smiling, bobbing their heads, and whistling the tune, "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life." It is a perfect juxtaposition, a masterpiece of the darkest satire in history. But this iconic anthem was almost strangled in the crib by its own creators. Eric Idle wrote the song as a spontaneous joke, a light-hearted, sarcastic melody to close out a tragic scene. But when he brought the rough draft to the first Monty Python script meeting, the reaction he got was chillingly cold. No laughs, no nods of approval, just awkward silence and skeptical stares. The song was shelved. The real miracle only happened during a lunch break on set in Tunisia. The sound technician accidentally played back the demo tape of the song. The exhausted stagehands, carpenters, and lighting crew suddenly perked up their ears. They started mumbling along, and then collectively whistled the tune so loudly it echoed across the entire set. Director Terry Jones witnessed this and realized this melody had a terrifyingly infectious power. Instantly, the song's death sentence was overturned. Decades later, the melody that was once shunned has become an icon of British pop culture, belted out at football matches, royal events, and even at funerals. Number 16. The sinister payback for the traitor. In Hollywood, if you cross a screenwriter, you will be immortalized as an idiot. Lord Bernard Delfont, the studio chairman who cowardly pulled his funding and cancelled the project at the very last minute out of fear of religious backlash, became the victim of classic cinematic revenge. The Pythons didn't sue, they used their pens. In a scene at the Roman Colosseum, there is an obscure snack vendor played by Eric Idle. This vendor is muttering and complaining about slow business, and he drops an incredibly out-of-context line. I said, Bernie, they'll never make their money back on this one, will they? Mainstream audiences might have just chuckled and moved on, but anyone in the British film industry at the time had their jaws on the floor. It was a direct slap in the face. The Pythons permanently locked the name Bernie into a line mocking someone with narrow-minded vision. Bernie Delfont may have turned his back on the project to protect his reputation, but he could never escape the end credits of the very blasphemous movie he was so terrified of. Number 17. The Midnight Panic. Cleanup at a historical monument. The movie didn't just freeload off the Jesus of Nazareth set. Several scenes were also shot at actual ancient Roman ruins in Tunisia, strictly protected heritage sites. The film crew had to sign dozens of agreements with local authorities, promising they wouldn't scratch a single brick. However, disaster struck during the scene where the flying saucer crashes into the ground. The pyrotechnic team used way too much black powder and special effects paint. After the massive smoky explosion, as the dust settled, the director was horrified to discover a section of the 1,000-year-old historic stone wall was scorched pitch black and caked in hardened paint. If the Tunisian authorities discovered this the next morning, the entire film crew would be immediately deported or even thrown in jail for vandalizing heritage. With no other options, in the dead of night, a reluctant Black Ops team of crew members had to sneak back to the scene. Armed with scrub brushes, buckets of water, and piles of dirt and sand, they frantically scrubbed, scraped paint, and camouflaged the stone wall all night long to erase every trace before the sun came up. They played ridiculous clowns on screen, but behind the scenes, they fully understood the heavy price of accidentally trampling on history. Number 18. The script incubated from a bar to the beach. Blasphemy is rarely born in solemn libraries. It is incubated amidst the smell of alcohol and ocean breeze. The very first seeds of Life of Brian were planted in a smoke-filled bar in Amsterdam, while the 6 Python members were drunk and furious with the press. They realized that the Bible wasn't just a sacred book, it was incredibly fertile ground for satirizing mob psychology and political blindness. Instead of locking themselves in stuffy rooms in London, they decided to go big. George Harrison provided them with a gorgeous villa on the island of Barbados. For months, the 6 greatest comedic minds in Britain sat lounging on a Caribbean beach, rum in hand, barefoot in the white sand, writing a script that would shake the world. A movie mocking the Bible was born in Amsterdam, penned on a beach in Barbados, and finally shot on the sacred lands of Tunisia. A wildly bohemian production process. No wonder it birthed a masterpiece that pissed off the entire religious world. Number 19. The box office, smash that slapped the quitters in the face. Let's look back at the starting line of Life of Brian, losing their investor right before shooting began, being labeled garbage by religious groups before anyone had seen a single frame, banned in major cities and rejected by national television broadcasters. With an incredibly meager production budget of just $4 million, every financial expert in Hollywood was dead certain it would be a colossal flop. But life always holds spectacular comebacks. The boycott and outrage accidentally morphed into a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign that was 100% free. Audiences flooded theaters worldwide out of sheer curiosity to see what had made the bishops so furious. The result? The movie raked in over $20 million in its initial release, rising to become the highest-grossing British film in America in 1979. All the panic, all the bans didn't kill the film. Instead, they forged a golden launchpad that propelled this work straight into the pantheon of immortal masterpieces. Number 20. The crazy funeral and reenacting the protests. Decades have passed, but the Life of Brian phenomenon remains an untouchable monument. In 2011, BBC 4 produced a television movie titled Holy Flying Circus. It wasn't a dry documentary, but a surreal, insane lens aiming to recreate the intense backlash and the historic televised debate between the Pythons and conservatives. Even 30 years later, the work continued to spark conversations about the boundary between faith and rebellion. But to truly capture the spirit of Monty Python, we have to talk about how they faced death. When Graham Chapman passed away in 1989 from a severe illness, the group didn't mourn him in fake silence. At his memorial service, John Cleese stepped up to the podium and delivered a eulogy packed with the most vulgar curse words imaginable, reasoning that Graham would never forgive me if I threw away a glorious opportunity to shock everyone on his behalf. The absolute peak of insanity occurred at the 1998 Aspen Comedy Festival. The 4 remaining members sat on stage for a reunion. Right next to them sat an urn of ashes, placed with solemn respect. And then, mid-speech, Terry Gilliam accidentally kicked the podium. The urn crashed to the floor and shattered. Grey ashes spilled everywhere across the stage. Horrified gasps erupted from the audience. Guests screamed as John Cleese frantically grabbed a vacuum cleaner and vacuumed up the ashes of his best friend. It turned out the whole thing was an elaborately staged hoax. Later on, a portion of Chapman's real ashes was packed into a cannon and fired straight into the sky to ring in the new millennium. Life of Brian challenged political institutions, baffled censors, and proved one brutal truth. Blasphemy isn't always disrespectful. If this crazy journey left you shocked or made you laugh harder than you expected, leave your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to Strangest Movie Facts to uncover more shocking mysteries behind legendary films.